Tonight, power to the parents.
There's people like me and a line of other people out there who will gladly take your seat.
School closures, mask mandates, and social issues are pushing parents into a new role as swing voters in the midterm elections.
Figure it out!
And unemployment in America, the economic impact, and the latest numbers after a series of lows. Plus, March for the Martyrs. Christians gather in solidarity as persecution intensifies around the globe. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. From the economy to education, voters prepare to weigh in at the polls. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm Caitlin Burke. Inflation and abortion. A recent poll shows those are the top two issues driving voters to the ballot box come November. The latest NPR PBS NewsHour Marist poll shows 30% say inflation is top of mind when they think about voting in the midterm elections. 22% say the fierce debate over abortion in America is prompting them to head to the polls. And rounding out the top 5 issues, health care, the January 6 hearings, and immigration. Notably not on that list, education. An August survey from Pew Research Centers found 58% of registered voters say education is actually a top midterm voting issue. A New York Times op-ed underscores that. Opinion writer Jessica Grouse spoke to pollster Frank Luntz for the piece. She writes, there's still time for politicians up and down the ballot to highlight their plans for and commitment to improving public education and to make sure parents know their concerns are being heard. But we're only weeks from Election Day. While I think the leaching of trust in public education may not be so dire that it determines something like control of Congress, Luntz isn't so sure, saying of parents, they were losing faith in 2020, 2019, they lost faith in 2022. That is a very important distinction. CBN senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener has been reporting on parents' frustration with the public school system. She brings us this story on how that frustration could lead to a political transformation, with parents taking on the title of swing voters.
For more than 2 years, parents have faced challenges from school closures and mask mandates to gender policies. American education is seen as a growing concern, leading to predictions that many parents seeing red will vote that way too.
There's people like me and a line of other people out there who will gladly take your seat.
Rallying cries heard round the country.
Figure it out.
From infuriated parents after their kids faced months of remote learning.
We're like, when can they come for their in-person education that they're entitled to by the Virginia state law?
Many of them, largely Republican, began activist groups.
We're going to talk about the need for change in the Loudoun County School Board.
Launched school board recalls and filed lawsuits, not only attacking school closures.
We've certainly been seeing an increase in referrals for therapy just across the board.
But also lessons in the classroom.
CRT is racist. It is abusive.
Pornography in textbooks.
You bought $1.8 million worth of these trash books.
Transgender policies.
You took away my ability to parent my child, even before I had any knowledge.
And more.
I was taught at a very young age what to look for in socialism. What do? They go right to the children.
The anger and impact of parents getting so much attention.
Enough of the toxicity and the division. And
they've been crowned this election cycle's potential heavyweights.
The ball is absolutely in their court. I believe that parents are beginning to have a much better sense of how much power they have.
With midterms looming, a number of polls are raising red flags for Democrats, suggesting the party is losing the battle on education.
I voted a straight red ticket this time, and I'm not afraid to say it because I was so angry and so frustrated.
The numbers indicating as confidence falls, more voters favor conservative classroom policies.
Whatever agenda is going on, we need to understand what our rights are, how easy it is to lose your freedoms.
More than 80% say they would cross party lines for a candidate whose education platform they support.
So a number as high as 82% is astounding. And also, I was pretty interested to find that it was consistent across all political ideologies.
The trend is especially apparent among Black parents and those of special needs children.
I am my child's parent, and I decide what they will be educated on.
A poll of likely voters by one of the largest and most progressive teachers' unions found voters trust the GOP more than Democrats to handle public education. The power of the polls on full display last fall in Virginia.
Parents were certainly the swing voters that delivered Virginia to the Republicans.
When Republican Glenn Youngkin pulled off an unlikely upset in a state Joe Biden won handily in 2020.
Joe Biden will win Virginia's 13 electoral votes.
Fox News is calling the Virginia governor's race for Republican Glenn Youngkin.
Youngkin made inroads across party lines by promising parents a seat at the table.
I believe parents should be in charge of their kids' education.
While his Democrat opponent told them they should have none.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
Ron DeSantis, the next governor of the state of Florida.
Education also helped put Florida Republican Ron DeSantis in the governor's mansion.
Ron DeSantis won that race because Black women voted against their political party for him, specifically on the issue of school choice.
And in another striking switch, a new survey shows parents overwhelmingly consider education more important than the economy or health care. Donald Trump's Education Secretary Betsy DeVos says parents are rightfully upset with the Biden administration.
Are you surprised that they went so far as to essentially label parents domestic terrorists?
And they're told that they cannot speak up. And if they do speak up, they have the threat of the FBI coming investigating or the National Guard even. I mean, it is just inconceivable to me.
Still, pundits insist both parties have work to do.
Democrats have lost trust when we look at the numbers. It doesn't exactly mean that Republicans have gained that trust. So it creates an opportunity potentially for both sides to gather those voters.
With just a few months until the election, some political observers recommend Democrats should go back to the basics.
The Democrats just have to make sure that they're talking about the quality of our schools and making sure that children are safe and learning and not get caught up in all of these conversations about the cultural, social issues. I think that will really resonate with swing voters.
By a 32-point margin, recent polling shows parents would favor candidates who supported teaching less about race and more core subjects like math and reading. The data also suggests that education could become a single voter issue this fall among parents, meaning they may cast their ballots on this issue alone. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
For more, let's bring in Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, as we saw in Tara's piece, the education issue proved to work in the favor of now Governor Republican Glenn Youngkin in the governor race of last year. Do you think that parent dissatisfaction with public schools will hurt Democrats in the midterms?
Well, it's clear in 2021 that was one of the energizing and mobilizing issues for Republicans in that 2021 campaign. I went back to 2020 and I looked at, first of all, what size of electorate are we talking about when we're talking about parents? And parents are people with men and women with children represented 34% of the electorate in 2020 in the presidential race. So we're talking about a sizable number. And then I looked at, okay, are parents voting any different than adults without children? And what I found in 2020 is the answer was no. Actually, there's a gender gap between how men and women vote, and women vote more Democratic. But in terms of having kids, it's been the same. And I went back and I looked at 2021 specifically, and Glenn Youngkin made significant gains among parents in his race compared to President Trump in 2020. But Youngkin made gains with adults without children as well. And so I think this remains one of the core issues that will mobilize some Republican voters, but it's also one of the issues of many, along with the economy and abortion.
Okay, so we know education is an issue, and as you mentioned, the economy is also top of mind. High inflation, rising interest rates, a turbulent stock market. Are things bad enough there to cost Democrats votes?
Well, this is where the Dobbs decision has complicated these midterm elections, because before that Dobbs decision, voters were mostly focused on inflation and economic issues, from gas prices, supply chain issues, cost of groceries, cost of living, cost of insurance, all these things. But now the Dobbs decision and the threat to and the potential for not having any legal access to abortion has become more of an issue than what it was 6 months ago. And I think independent voters are wrestling with a dissatisfaction with the economy, but also concern that some Republicans in some states have gone even further than the Supreme Court to eliminate all access to legal abortion. And majority of Americans don't want to go that far.
Now, Nathan, I'm going to quote you here in a new piece for Roll Call. You write about the midterms, saying, in a rare moment of unity, Republicans and Democrats are poised to come together. You've got to explain what you mean.
Yeah, I think we're going to have record turnout in 2022, and it's partially based on these issues that we're talking about. We have two very motivated parties. We have a Republican Party motivated by a number of issues, including education and school boards, but we also have now a motivated Democratic Party motivated by the Dobbs decision and the reversal of Roe v. Wade. And you can't get record turnout with just one party that's excited and one party that's depressed. You have to have everyone amped up and ready to vote. And I think that's where we're headed, because each side sees important issues that are on the table this November.
All right. Such great insights. Nathan Gonzalez with Inside Elections. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Caitlin.
In economic news, after hitting 4-month lows, new unemployment claim numbers are seeing a slight rise. According to today's figures from the Labor Department, 213,000 Americans submitted new jobless claims last week. That's up about 5,000 from the week before. Overall, about 1.4 million people now receiving jobless benefits across the country. Here with us now to talk about what those numbers mean is Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, a small rise in unemployment claim numbers that were already fairly low. Any concern for you when it comes to today's figures?
Not with today's figures, Caitlin. These numbers really match the previous week. We only had a downward revision in the previous week to explain how we got that slight rise. The low 200s is remarkably low for new jobless claims, particularly when we think about the high level of anxiety out there among consumers and businesses, not only about inflation, but the risks of recession as well. The reality is that the job market really isn't budging much. It's still experiencing relatively low unemployment, a high degree of employment, and very few layoffs. So this is the one part of the economy that has yet to really make a move that is negative.
You recently tweeted about the Fed's come-from-behind moves in the battle against inflation. Was this a case of too little, too late, or is there hope that prices will begin to fall sometime soon?
Well, we can have both observations, I think. And the reality is that even Federal Reserve officials acknowledge that they were slow to come to this rate-raising party. And we're all now paying the price for that, in a sense. And with the most recent interest rate hike of 0.75%, the third such move by the Federal Open Market Committee and the fifth interest rate hike overall, the Fed has an increased sense of urgency about getting interest rates to a higher level that truly restrict the economy and truly dampen demand. And so it's possible that we've seen peak inflation. I'm not going to bet anyone's money on that just yet. But even if we have declared a peak in inflation at some point in the not too distant future, that doesn't mean that high prices are behind us. It just means that they aren't rising at the same very high rate.
Now, yesterday, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said the chances of a soft landing are likely to diminish. We keep checking in with you about this, but do you think we're heading towards a full-blown recession?
Well, there's no doubt that we will experience a recession sometime. That's part of the natural economic cycle. The question whether that timeline is growing ever closer and the fear of a more severe recession growing. I would say that as I survey across the landscape, I think that corporate executives are increasingly concerned about the risk of a recession in the near term. Economists right now appear to still be putting that at about 50-50. I would tell anyone who's listening today that if we just follow our bank rate surveys over time, they do themselves a favor by saving for emergencies, because the failure to do that is among the top financial regrets that we find. And if we get through the current period and beyond with a better than expected showing, then you actually still have more money in the bank, and that also is not a bad thing. But I would say, attention is high with respect to the risk of a recession, and it wouldn't shock me if we have one in the next 6 to 12 months.
All right. Thanks, Mark. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Standing up for those suffering because of their faith. A preview of this weekend's March for the Martyrs when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. Christians are gathering in Washington, D.C. ahead of the third annual March for the Martyrs. As religious persecution intensifies around the world, the event aims to unite Christians calling for global religious freedom. The March for the Martyrs event comes as 1 in 7 Christians around the world face high levels of persecution, according to the Open Doors World Watch List. Marchers who gather on the National Mall this Saturday will help raise awareness for those 360 million suffering for their faith. Here with us now is Andrew Brunson, Special Advisor for Religious Freedom at the Family Research Council and a keynote speaker at this weekend's March for the Martyrs. Pastor Brunson, you've experienced persecution for your faith firsthand and spent 2 years as a political prisoner in Turkey. You've said it was an honor to suffer for Jesus Christ. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Yes, I didn't expect to end up in a Turkish prison, but I did, and I did experience breaking. It's very difficult to undergo persecution sometimes, and I broke, and then God rebuilt me during my time in prison. And we often, I think of persecution as something in the past or in just other places, and it's true that there's persecution all over the world right now, and that's one of the reasons I'm involved in this event, is because I want to highlight believers who are paying a price for their faith. But also, I think persecution is going to come to the United States. And so those who are suffering for their faith around the world right now are going to be a very good example for us, and also an encouragement as we come under pressure in the United States.
How did your experience with suffering shape your understanding of what other persecuted Christians are going through?
Well, I think that I often meet people who have maybe an unwarranted confidence that persecution is always good, and that good results will come from it, is what I mean. And the truth is that persecution brings you to a crisis point, and it can draw people toward God, but it can also push people away from God. And so I think persecution is actually very dangerous. And some people become stronger believers. I ended up coming out stronger than when I went in, with a deeper love for God. But I also went through a real period of doubting and questioning. And so what I try to tell people here in the States is, since I believe that we're coming into a time of pressure here, not that we will be like North Korea or Iran or China, but I think there will be significant social and financial pressure on faithful followers of Jesus Christ. And I want to warn people it can be more difficult than you think, and not everyone makes it through.
Now, you said you feel like this kind of persecution could be coming to the U.S. Does that mean you feel like persecution against believers is intensifying?
It is intensifying, and there's just been a real shift in our country. And I just look at the issue of religious freedom. I think many institutions in our society here in the United States no longer place a high value on religious freedom. It's becoming politicized. And in the past, in the 90s, there was, I think, broad bipartisan recognition that religious freedom is a basic human right. And the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was passed almost unanimously by Congress. But it wouldn't pass now, and it's even hard to get it passed at a state level. So I think that the progressive left is beginning to see religious freedom not so much as a human right, but as an issue of the political right. I think they would see it the political right using religious freedom as a cover for bigots. And obviously that's not the case, but it's coming to be seen that way. And this is going to have very negative consequences in our country, because many people who are in power across our institutions in this country, throughout our culture, not only have not had a personal experience of faith, but they're surrounded by people who haven't. And so they not only disagree with people of faith, but they also don't understand them anymore.
Well, Pastor Brunson, we really appreciate you coming on.
Can I just say I want to encourage people, let's prepare our hearts ahead of time, and there is time to prepare right now.
Thank you, sir. Have a great weekend. A bipartisan push to define the vice president's role in elections clears a hurdle on Capitol Hill. The details next on Faith Nation. One of the nation's most restrictive abortion measures on pause tonight in Indiana. The law went into effect last week, but today a judge blocked it as abortion clinics sue, saying the measure violates the state constitution. The law bans nearly all abortions from the very beginning of a pregnancy. It provides exemptions to save the life of the mother or for deadly fetal anomalies up to 20 weeks. For up to 10 weeks, there are exemptions for rape or incest. Legislation intended to prevent another January 6 crisis passed the House late Wednesday. It aims to clarify the election certification process and the vice president's role in it. Lawmakers began discussing a need for reform after the chaos of January 6 and the calls from former President Trump and his supporters pressuring former Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election results.
Vice President did not have the power to then somehow change what the Senate had decided or what the House had decided. I think there were folks hoping he would do that, but he just didn't have the power to do it, neither under the statute nor under the Constitution.
The House measure also makes it harder for members of Congress to delay the certification process with objections that aren't based on legitimate concerns. A bipartisan group of senators is also working on similar legislation. We'll be right back. Finally, tonight, as cleanup from Hurricane Fiona begins in Puerto Rico, safety is a top concern for the island's residents, and that includes the four-legged kind. After being rescued from floodwaters, 30 dogs and cats are being rescued from the devastated island. After making their way to Miami, the animals were taken in and treated by the Humane Society of Broward County. The group is now looking to find the pets forever homes in Florida. All right, folks, time to head to Florida and give these animals a good home. That's going to do it for Faith Nation tonight. We will see you tomorrow.